What happens when the impossible becomes reality in the skies above the Third Reich's capital? Imagine yourself as a seasoned Luftwaffe pilot, one of Germany's elite aces who has survived countless dogfights over occupied Europe. You have shot down British Spitfires, evaded American bombers and lived to tell the tale. But on a particular day in early 1944, you look up and see something that defies everything you thought you knew about the limits of American air power. The sky over Berlin, the heart of Nazi Germany, is filled with American fighters. Not a handful, not a small formation. 200 gleaming P-51 Mustangs, their silver wings catching the winter sun, stretching from horizon to horizon like a metallic storm cloud. This is the story of how that moment came to be and how it changed the course of the air war over Europe forever. The appearance of massive formations of P-51 Mustangs over Berlin represented more than just a tactical achievement. It symbolized the complete transformation of American air power from a struggling force barely able to protect its own bombers to a dominant presence capable of challenging the Luftwaffe in its own backyard. The German pilots who witnessed this spectacle understood immediately that the rules of engagement had fundamentally changed. The Americans were no longer visitors to European skies. They had become conquerors of the air itself, and the Mustang was their weapon of conquest. The sheer audacity of the operation cannot be overstated. Berlin lay approximately 580 miles from the American bomber bases in eastern England. This represented a round-trip distance of over 1,000 miles, not accounting for evasive maneuvers, combat operations, or navigational deviations. Every mile flown consumed precious fuel. Every minute in combat drained reserves needed for the journey home. The logistics of putting 200 fighters over such a distant target, maintaining formation cohesion, coordinating with bomber streams, and returning safely represented organizational and technical challenges that would have seemed insurmountable just months earlier. The year 1943 had been brutal for the United States Army Air Forces in Europe. American bomber crews flew deep into German territory with inadequate fighter escort, suffering devastating losses to swarms of Luftwaffe interceptors. The 8th Air Force, based in England, sent waves of B-17 flying fortresses and B-24 Liberators against German industrial targets. But the escort fighters of the time lacked the range to accompany them all the way to their targets and back. Republic P-47 Thunderbolts and Lockheed P-38 Lightnings could escort bombers partway into Germany, but they had to turn back long before reaching the most critical targets deep in the Reich. This left the bombers vulnerable during the most dangerous portions of their missions, and German fighters exploited this weakness mercilessly. The losses mounted with horrifying speed. During the second Schweinfurt raid in October 1943, the 8th Air Force lost 60 bombers in a single day, with nearly 600 airmen killed or captured. The strategic bombing campaign seemed on the verge of collapse. Some military planners began questioning whether daylight precision bombing was even feasible against a determined enemy with modern fighter defenses. The problem was not courage or determination. American bomber crews pressed on despite casualties that would have broken lesser units. The problem was simple mathematics and physics. Without fighter escort for the entire mission, bombers could not survive in sufficient numbers to justify the campaign. The bombing raids of 1943 revealed the brutal arithmetic of unescorted bomber operations. German fighter tactics evolved to exploit American vulnerabilities systematically. Luftwaffe controllers tracked incoming bomber formations with radar, scrambled interceptors from multiple airfields, and vectored them to attack points where American escorts had turned back due to fuel limitations. German pilots developed techniques for attacking bomber formations that maximized their effectiveness while minimizing exposure to defensive fire. They would approach from the front, where bombers had fewer defensive guns, closing at combined speeds exceeding 500 miles per hour before firing short, devastating bursts and breaking away before the bombers' gunners could respond effectively. The psychological toll on bomber crews was immense. Young men, many barely out of their teens, climbed into their aircraft knowing they faced a 1 in 4 chance of being shot down, killed, or captured on any given mission. They watched friends die in horrific ways. Bombers exploded in midair, broke apart under the stress of combat damage, or spiraled earthward trailing flames. Parachutes sometimes failed. Men burned alive. The survivors had to suppress their trauma, return to base, and prepare for the next mission. The rotation policy required completing 25 missions before returning home. but the casualty rates meant most crews would not survive that long. Some men broke under the strain, unable to continue. Most endured, sustained by duty, camaraderie, and the knowledge that their missions mattered. Enter the North American P-51 Mustang, a fighter that would revolutionize air warfare and make possible what German strategists had considered impossible. The Mustang began its life as a fighter designed for the British Royal Air Force, developed rapidly by North American Aviation in response to a British Purchasing Commission request in 1940. The original Mustang, powered by an Allison engine, proved exceptional at low altitudes, but disappointing at the high altitudes where bomber escort duty required peak performance. Everything changed when someone had the inspired idea of mating the Mustang's sleek airframe with the British Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, the same power plant that made the Supermarine Spitfire legendary. The marriage of American airframe and British engine was not immediately obvious. North American Aviation had designed the Mustang around the Allison V1710 engine, an excellent power plant for low-altitude operations, but one that lost performance rapidly above 15,000 feet due to its single-stage supercharger. The Royal Air Force used early Mustangs primarily for ground attack and tactical reconnaissance, roles where low-altitude performance mattered more than high-altitude capability. Meanwhile, the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, with its sophisticated two-stage, two-speed supercharger, maintained excellent power output at the altitudes where bomber escort missions were fought, typically between 20 and 30,000 feet. The result was extraordinary. The P-51B and P-51D Mustangs, equipped with American-built Packard Merlin engines, combined unprecedented range with excellent performance at all altitudes. With drop tanks, a Mustang could escort bombers to Berlin and beyond, more than 1,100 miles from its base in England, engage in combat, and still return home. This represented roughly double the combat radius of earlier escort fighters. Moreover, the Mustang was fast, maneuverable, and heavily armed. It could fight the Luftwaffe's best fighters on equal or better terms, while still accomplishing its primary mission of protecting bombers. The technical specifications of the P-51D Mustang tell part of the story. The aircraft weighed approximately 7,000 pounds empty and could carry up to 12,000 pounds at maximum takeoff weight. Its Packard V1650-7 Merlin engine produced 1,490 horsepower, driving a four-bladed propeller that efficiently converted power into thrust. The Mustang's maximum speed exceeded 440 miles per hour at optimal altitude, making it one of the fastest fighters in service. Its service ceiling reached 41,900 feet, well above the altitudes where most combat occurred. The aircraft could climb at 3,200 feet per minute when lightly loaded, giving it excellent energy management capabilities in combat. The armament package of the P-51D consisted of 6 Browning M2 50 caliber machine guns, 3 mounted in each wing. Each gun carried approximately 400 rounds of ammunition, providing about 30 seconds of total firing time. This might seem limited, but experienced pilots learned to fire in short, precise bursts, making their ammunition last through multiple engagements. The 50 caliber round was devastating against aircraft, capable of punching through armor plate, destroying engines and shredding control surfaces. The wing-mounted installation provided good concentration of fire at typical combat ranges while avoiding the synchronization issues that plagued nose-mounted guns firing through propeller arcs. But the Mustang was just a tool. The real transformation came from how American commanders chose to employ their new weapon. In early 1944, the United States Army Air Forces made a critical decision that would alter the fundamental character of the air war. They formed specialized fighter groups equipped entirely with P-51 Mustangs and tasked them not just with close bomber escort, but with aggressive pursuit of the Luftwaffe wherever it could be found. One of these groups, the 4th Fighter Group, would play a particularly dramatic role in demonstrating what Mustang power truly meant when concentrated in overwhelming force. The strategic context for this decision involved preparations for Operation Overlord, the planned invasion of France scheduled for June 1944. Supreme Allied Commander General Dwight Eisenhower insisted on complete air superiority over the invasion beaches and the approaches to them. This meant more than just preventing German aircraft from attacking the invasion fleet and ground forces. It required destroying the Luftwaffe's ability to interfere with Allied operations anywhere in Western Europe. The only way to achieve this goal was through aggressive offensive operations that forced the Luftwaffe to fight battles of attrition it could not win. The 4th Fighter Group had an unusual and illustrious pedigree. Unlike most American fighter units, it began its existence as a formation of American volunteer pilots flying for the British Royal Air Force before the United States entered World War II. These men, unable to wait for their own country to join the fight against fascism, traveled to Canada and enlisted in the Royal Canadian Air Force before transferring to the RAF. They formed the 3 Eagle squadrons, flying Hawker Hurricanes and Supermarine Spitfires in defense of Britain and on offensive sweeps over occupied France. By the time the United States entered the war in December 1941, these American volunteers had already accumulated significant combat experience and established impressive records against the Luftwaffe. The Eagle Squadron pilots represented a particular type of American, adventurous, idealistic, and willing to risk everything for a cause they believed in. Many came from privileged backgrounds, college-educated men who could have avoided combat entirely. Others were working-class Americans who saw the war against fascism as the defining struggle of their generation and wanted to participate regardless of personal cost. They shared a common trait. They could not stand idle while democracy fought for survival against totalitarianism. These men violated American neutrality laws to join the fight, risking legal consequences along with the obvious physical dangers of combat aviation. Their experience with the Royal Air Force proved invaluable. British fighter tactics in 1940 and 1941 were the most advanced in the world. Forged in the desperate battles of the summer and fall of 1940, when Fighter Command defended Britain against the Luftwaffe's attempted conquest, the Eagle Squadron pilots learned the importance of altitude advantage, the tactics of energy fighting, the value of teamwork in combat, and the cruel reality that victory went to the aggressive and skilled, while the hesitant and unlucky died quickly. They absorbed lessons written in blood and built reputations as skilled, determined fighters. In September 1942, the Eagle squadrons transferred from the Royal Air Force to the United States Army Air Forces and were redesignated as the 4th Fighter Group. The transition was not entirely smooth. The former Eagle Squadron pilots had to adapt to American military customs, paperwork, and regulations after years of operating under British command. They had to exchange their beloved Spitfires for Republic P-47 Thunderbolts, a change many initially resisted. The P-47 was an excellent fighter, but it was also heavy, massive, and very different from the nimble Spitfires they had mastered. Some pilots derisively called the Thunderbolt the 7-ton milk bottle, and questioned whether American aircraft could match British quality. The Republic P-47 Thunderbolt was indeed a massive aircraft by fighter standards. It weighed over 10,000 pounds empty and nearly 18,000 pounds at maximum takeoff weight, making it one of the heaviest single-engine fighters of the war. Powered by a Pratt & Whitney R2800 double Wasp radial engine producing 2,000 horsepower. The Thunderbolt was fast in a dive and could absorb tremendous battle damage, but it lacked the nimble handling characteristics that pilots who had flown Spitfires expected. The aircraft's strengths lay in its ruggedness, its devastating armament of 850 caliber machine guns, and its ability to dive away from trouble faster than almost any opponent could follow. The leadership of the 4th Fighter Group during this formative period proved crucial. Colonel Don Blakesley, who took command in early 1944, was exactly the kind of aggressive, innovative leader the unit needed. Blakesley had flown with the Eagle squadrons and possessed both the combat experience and the force of personality to mold the group into an elite fighting force. He was a pilot's pilot, leading from the front and never asking his men to take risks he would not take himself. Under his leadership, the 4th Fighter Group began developing the tactics and aggressive mentality that would make it one of the most successful fighter units in the European theater. Blakesley embodied the warrior ethos that characterized the best combat leaders. He accumulated more combat flying hours than almost any other American fighter pilot in Europe, personally leading many of the group's most dangerous missions. He did not manage the war from behind a desk. He flew. His pilots knew that when Blakesley ordered an attack, he would be leading it. When he told them to press on despite danger, he would be in the most dangerous position himself. This kind of leadership inspired fierce loyalty and a willingness to follow orders even when those orders demanded extraordinary courage or sacrifice. When P-51 Mustangs began arriving in late 1943 and early 1944, the 4th Fighter Group converted to the new aircraft with enthusiasm. The pilots immediately recognized the Mustang's potential. Here was a fighter that combined the range necessary for deep penetration missions with performance that equaled or exceeded anything the Luftwaffe could field. The Mustang was not quite as rugged as the P-47, which could absorb enormous punishment and still bring its pilot home, but it was faster, more maneuverable, and possessed a grace in the air that pilots loved. Most importantly, it could go anywhere the bombers went and still have fuel for extended combat. The transition to the P-51 required intensive training. Pilots had to learn the characteristics of their new mount, understanding how it differed from the Thunderbolt they had been flying. The Mustang was lighter, more responsive to control inputs, and required a more delicate touch. It accelerated quickly, but also lost energy rapidly in sustained turning fights. Its laminar flow wing provided excellent high-speed performance, but could produce sudden stalls if mishandled at low speeds. The cooling system, with its radiator mounted under the fuselage, was vulnerable to ground fire and combat damage. Pilots had to learn to manage these characteristics while maintaining the aggressive mindset necessary for successful fighter operations. The strategic situation in early 1944 demanded exactly what the P-51 equipped fighter groups could now deliver. The Allied invasion of Europe was scheduled for June, and air superiority over the continent was absolutely essential for the invasion's success. General Dwight Eisenhower and his air commanders understood that the Luftwaffe had to be defeated before D-Day. This meant more than just protecting bombers during raids. It meant actively hunting down German fighters, attacking their airfields, and forcing the Luftwaffe into battles of attrition that would bleed its strength. The Germans had excellent aircraft and many skilled pilots, but they could not match American industrial production or the growing pool of trained American aviators entering combat. The mathematics of attrition warfare favored the Allies overwhelmingly. American aircraft factories produced fighters at a rate Germany could not hope to match. In 1944, North American aviation alone built more than 9,000 P-51 Mustangs. Republic Aviation produced thousands of P-47 Thunderbolts. Consolidated Aircraft and Boeing built thousands of bombers. American pilot training programs graduated new aviators by the thousands, providing replacement pilots faster than combat could consume them. Meanwhile, Germany struggled to maintain production levels under constant bombardment, faced chronic fuel shortages that limited training, and watched its pool of experienced pilots dwindle through casualties that could not be replaced. American strategic thinking evolved to embrace this new reality. Instead of keeping fighters tethered closely to bomber formations, doctrine now encouraged fighters to pursue German aircraft aggressively. When Luftwaffe fighters approached bomber formations, American escort fighters would engage them and, if possible, pursue them back to their airfields. Fighter groups began flying dedicated sweep missions, independent of bomber raids, specifically to find and destroy German fighters. The goal was not just to win individual battles, but to destroy the Luftwaffe's ability to resist through continuous attrition. The concentration of P-51 Mustang groups represented a deliberate allocation of resources to achieve this strategic objective. By early 1944, the 8th Air Force could field multiple fighter groups equipped entirely with Mustangs. These groups could be combined into massive formations that would overwhelm local German defenses through sheer numbers, while still maintaining the flexibility and performance needed for fighter versus fighter combat. The key was coordination and concentration of force at critical times and places. The appearance of 200 P-51 Mustangs over Berlin in a single group formation challenged every assumption German air defense planners had made about the strategic bombing campaign. The Germans had built their defensive strategy around several core premises. First, they believed that American long-range fighters, if they existed at all, would be so compromised in performance that German interceptors could easily defeat them. Second, they assumed that fighter escorts would always be spread thinly across multiple bomber formations, allowing German fighters to concentrate against portions of the bomber stream. Third, they counted on the vast distances involved to limit the number of escort fighters that could reach Berlin and other distant targets. All three assumptions proved catastrophically wrong. The P-51 Mustang was not a compromise. It was arguably the finest all-around fighter aircraft in service with any nation during World War II. Its Packard Merlin engine delivered 1,490 horsepower, propelling the aircraft to speeds exceeding 440 miles per hour at optimal altitude. It could climb rapidly, turn tightly, and dive with the best fighters Germany possessed. The Mustang mounted 650 caliber machine guns, providing devastating firepower against both air and ground targets. German pilots who engaged Mustangs quickly learned that these American fighters could match or exceed the performance of Focke-Wulf FW-190s and Messerschmitt Bf-109s, the Luftwaffe's primary fighters. The Focke-Wulf FW-190 was particularly respected by Allied pilots. Introduced in 1941, it had shocked the Royal Air Force with performance superior to the Spitfire Mark V, then in service. The radial-engined FW-190 was fast, heavily armed, and superbly maneuverable, especially in roll rate where it exceeded every Allied fighter. German pilots loved the aircraft for its robust construction and excellent handling characteristics. Yet even this formidable fighter could not claim decisive superiority over the P-51 Mustang. In a fight between equally skilled pilots, the outcome depended more on tactics, situational awareness, and luck than on any inherent advantage of one aircraft over the other. The Messerschmitt Bf-109, Germany's primary fighter throughout the war, had been continuously developed and improved since its introduction in the mid-1930s. The late-war Bf-109G and K models were fast, well-armed, and capable fighters in experienced hands. The 109 had advantages in climb rate and acceleration compared to the Mustang, and its small size made it a difficult target. However, it suffered from increasingly cramped cockpits as equipment was added, limited fuel capacity that restricted range, and handling characteristics that became increasingly difficult as weight increased with successive modifications. The Mustang's superiority in range and its better handling at high speeds gave American pilots advantages they exploited effectively. The concentration of 200 fighters from a single group shattered the second assumption about dispersed escorts. This massive formation represented overwhelming force at a specific point in time and space. When German fighter controllers vectored interceptors toward American bomber formations approaching Berlin, they suddenly found themselves confronting not the expected handful of escorts, but a vast swarm of Mustangs. The numerical advantage the Germans typically enjoyed through concentration of their forces suddenly reversed. Individual German pilots, accustomed to attacking in groups against isolated American fighters, now faced the terrifying prospect of being outnumbered themselves. The German air defense system, sophisticated as it was, could not compensate for such overwhelming numerical disadvantage. Luftwaffe controllers received radar reports of incoming raids and scrambled fighters from multiple airfields across Germany. They vectored these fighters toward predicted interception points, attempting to mass sufficient strength to overwhelm portions of the bomber stream. This system worked adequately when American escorts were limited in number and range. When 200 Mustangs appeared over Berlin, the system broke down. No amount of tactical cleverness could overcome the simple fact that the Americans had concentrated superior force at the critical point. The psychological impact of this reversal cannot be overstated. German fighter pilots in 1944 were increasingly young, insufficiently trained replacements for the veterans lost in 2 years of intensive combat. The Luftwaffe's training programs had been cut back severely as fuel shortages and Allied bombing disrupted normal operations. New pilots arrived at combat squadrons with far fewer flying hours than their predecessors and minimal gunnery training. These inexperienced pilots depended heavily on leadership from surviving veterans and tactical advantages like surprise or numerical superiority. Confronting 200 enemy fighters eliminated any possibility of such advantages. The veterans who remained in the Luftwaffe by 1944 were among the most skilled fighter pilots in the world. Men like Adolf Galland, Günther Rall, and Johannes Steinhoff had survived years of combat through exceptional skill, situational awareness, and tactical brilliance. They understood air combat at an almost instinctive level and could extract maximum performance from their aircraft under the most demanding conditions. Yet even these exceptional pilots could not turn the tide against overwhelming numbers. They could shoot down individual American fighters, protect their wingmen, and occasionally disrupt attacks on bombers, but they could not prevent the inevitable outcome of the campaign. The third assumption about range limitations collapsed entirely with the Mustang's appearance. American engineers had designed the P-51 with exceptional fuel efficiency and long range as primary design goals. The aircraft's laminar flow wing, while difficult to manufacture to proper tolerances, generated less drag than conventional wing designs. The Mustang's streamlined fuselage minimized parasitic drag. Every aspect of the design emphasized efficiency, with internal fuel tanks topped off and two 75-gallon drop tanks attached. A P-51 could fly more than 2,000 miles. Even accounting for combat maneuvering, which consumed fuel rapidly, a Mustang could escort bombers to any target in Germany and engage in extended combat before returning to England. This unprecedented reach transformed the strategic equation. Previously, German aircraft factories, ball bearing plants, and other critical industries in central and eastern Germany enjoyed relative immunity from sustained American attack. The Luftwaffe could concentrate its defenses around these vital areas, knowing that American escorts would not reach them in significant numbers. With the arrival of Mustang groups in strength, nowhere in Germany remained safe. The Americans could strike any target they chose with fighter escort, adequate to ensure a significant proportion of the bombers reached their targets and returned safely. The formation of 200 Mustangs over Berlin also represented a statement about American industrial capacity and organizational capability. Building 200 P-51 Mustangs required enormous resources: aluminum, steel, rubber, sophisticated Packard Merlin engines, machine guns, ammunition, radios, and countless other components. Training 200 fighter pilots demanded instructors, training aircraft, fuel, and airfields. Transporting aircraft, pilots, and support personnel to England required cargo ships and careful logistics. Maintaining the aircraft in combat-ready condition needed skilled mechanics, spare parts, tools, and supplies. Every mission required intelligence briefings, weather forecasts, route planning, and coordination with bomber groups and other escort formations. The logistics of operating a fighter group from bases in England involved challenges that would have seemed impossible just a few years earlier. Each P-51 required regular maintenance that ranged from simple daily inspections to major engine overhauls after specific numbers of flying hours. Engines needed replacement after approximately 200 hours of operation. Control surfaces wore out and required replacement. Instruments failed and needed repair. Every combat mission resulted in battle damage that had to be repaired before the aircraft could fly again. Ground crews worked around the clock to keep aircraft operational, performing miracles of improvisation when proper spare parts were unavailable. The Germans could do the mathematics. If the Americans could put 200 fighters over Berlin from a single group, how many total fighters did they possess? How many more were being built in American factories? How could Germany, with its industries under constant bombardment and its resources stretched across multiple fronts, possibly match this scale of production? The appearance of such overwhelming force delivered a psychological blow that went beyond the immediate tactical situation. It demonstrated that America possessed the industrial might to simply overwhelm Germany through sheer weight of material. The tactical employment of such a large formation also challenged conventional fighter tactics. Most fighter combat in World War II involved relatively small formations. Flights of 4 aircraft, occasionally combined into squadrons of 16, represented the typical unit of maneuver. Coordinating 200 fighters required exceptional skill and careful planning. The formation had to maintain cohesion while remaining flexible enough to respond to threats. It needed to cover bomber formations while also preparing for offensive action against German interceptors. Communication became exponentially more complex with so many aircraft operating in the same airspace. American fighter leaders solved these challenges through rigorous training and clear doctrine. The basic building block remained the 4-ship flight with a leader and 3 wingmen. Multiple flights combined into squadrons and squadrons into groups, maintaining a hierarchical command structure that allowed for both centralized control and decentralized execution. Radio discipline was essential. Pilots learned to communicate essential information concisely while avoiding cluttering the airways with unnecessary chatter. Formation leaders developed situational awareness through visual scanning and radio reports, building a mental picture of the developing battle and making decisions that exploited American advantages. The 4-ship flight, or Finger 4 formation, had been adopted from German tactics observed early in the war. It replaced the outdated 3-ship Vic formation that the RAF and other air forces had used initially. In the Finger 4, aircraft positioned themselves like fingertips on an outstretched hand, with spacing that allowed each pilot to watch his assigned sector while being protected by his wingmen. The formation could turn in any direction without complex reorganization. When combat began, pairs of aircraft worked together, with one engaging while the other protected him from attack. This mutual support dramatically improved survival rates and combat effectiveness. The massive P-51 Mustang formation over Berlin solved the fundamental problem that had plagued American strategic bombing since its inception: how to protect bombers deep in enemy territory. The solution was elegantly simple in concept, but extraordinarily complex in execution. By concentrating overwhelming fighter strength at critical points, American commanders ensured that bomber formations would never be without adequate protection. The 200 Mustangs provided multiple layers of defense. The outer layer consisted of fighters, specifically tasked with intercepting German aircraft before they could reach the bombers. These Mustangs would climb to advantageous altitudes and patrol ahead of and beside the bomber stream, engaging any German fighters that appeared. Their job was to disrupt German attack formations, breaking them up and preventing coordinated assaults on the bombers. Even if these forward escorts did not shoot down every German fighter, they could scatter the attackers and prevent them from achieving the kind of concentrated firepower necessary to inflict serious damage on bomber formations. The concept of layered defense recognized that perfect protection was impossible, but adequate protection was achievable. Not every German fighter could be intercepted before reaching the bombers, but enough could be engaged to reduce the weight of attacks to manageable levels. Bombers themselves were heavily armed, with multiple defensive gun positions that could put up formidable defensive fire when properly concentrated. A tight bomber formation could survive attacks by small numbers of German fighters, but concentrated attacks by dozens of interceptors could overwhelm defenses and inflict catastrophic casualties. The escort fighters' primary job was preventing such concentrated attacks. A second layer of escorts flew closer to the bombers themselves, positioned to respond immediately if German fighters penetrated the outer screen. These Mustangs provided direct protection, attacking any German aircraft that approached within firing range of the bombers. Their presence forced German pilots to fight their way through determined fighter opposition before they could even attempt to attack the heavily armed bombers. This dramatically reduced the effectiveness of German interception tactics. Close escort duty required discipline and patience that did not come naturally to fighter pilots. The instinct in combat was to pursue targets aggressively, to chase down enemies and destroy them. Close escorts had to suppress this instinct and remain with the bombers even when tempting targets appeared nearby. They had to trust that other elements of the escort would handle threats outside their immediate area while they focused on protecting their assigned bomber formations. This required training, discipline, and confidence in the overall tactical plan. The third element of the solution involved offensive operations against German airfields and infrastructure. Fighter groups like the 4th did not limit themselves to defensive escort missions. They actively sought opportunities to attack German aircraft on the ground, strafe airfields, destroy transportation networks, and generally make life miserable for the Luftwaffe. These operations forced the Germans to disperse their forces, build elaborate defenses around airfields, and divert resources from offensive operations to protecting their own bases. The Mustang's long range made it possible to strike deep into Germany on these offensive sweeps, turning the entire country into a combat zone. Ground attack missions were extraordinarily dangerous. Aircraft at low altitude were vulnerable to every form of ground fire, from light machine guns to heavy flak batteries. Pilots making strafing runs had to fly predictable paths at low speeds, presenting easy targets to ground gunners. The rewards justified the risks. A fighter destroyed on the ground was just as effectively eliminated as one shot down in aerial combat, and ground attacks could destroy multiple aircraft in a single pass. Airfield attacks also destroyed fuel supplies, ammunition, spare parts, and facilities, degrading the Luftwaffe's ability to operate even aircraft that survived the initial attack. The psychological dimension of the solution proved as important as the tactical elements. When German pilots looked up and saw 200 American fighters, they faced a critical decision. Pressing home an attack against the bombers meant fighting through overwhelming numbers of escorts, with little chance of survival, even if they succeeded in damaging a few bombers. Breaking off and refusing combat meant allowing the bombers to attack their targets unmolested. Either choice represented failure. The appearance of such massive escort formations created a no-win situation for German defenders. This psychological pressure intensified as the air campaign continued. Each mission where German fighters declined combat emboldened American planners to take greater risks. Each mission where German fighters engaged and suffered heavy losses depleted the Luftwaffe's dwindling pool of experienced pilots. The Germans found themselves trapped in a death spiral. They had to fight to defend their country, but fighting meant taking casualties they could not replace. Not fighting meant surrendering air superiority without a battle. The massive Mustang formations accelerated this process by making every decision costly. Individual German pilots experienced this dilemma personally and tragically. They took off knowing they were likely outnumbered, flying against enemies with equal or better aircraft, protecting a homeland that was being systematically destroyed despite their best efforts. Some became fatalistic, believing death was inevitable and determined only to take enemies with them when they fell. Others sought ways to survive, becoming more cautious and less aggressive, which reduced their effectiveness but might allow them to live another day. A few managed to maintain both caution and effectiveness. The veterans whose skill and experience kept them alive when less capable pilots died around them. The solution extended beyond individual missions to encompass the entire strategic bombing campaign. By establishing air superiority over Germany through sustained operations, the Americans created conditions that allowed them to expand their targeting beyond traditional industrial objectives. With the Luftwaffe increasingly unable to contest American air superiority, bombers could strike transportation networks, oil refineries, and other targets that were previously too difficult or dangerous to attack consistently. The destruction of Germany's synthetic fuel production proved particularly devastating. Without fuel, the Luftwaffe's remaining aircraft sat idle on the ground, unable to challenge American air dominance. The oil campaign, launched in earnest in spring 1944, targeted Germany's synthetic fuel plants and natural petroleum reserves. Germany lacked significant domestic oil production and depended heavily on synthetic fuel produced through the Fischer-Tropsch process from coal. These production facilities were complex, difficult to repair, and absolutely essential to Germany's war effort. Systematic bombing of oil targets reduced German fuel production from approximately 200,000 tons per month in early 1944 to virtually nothing by early 1945. This fuel famine crippled not just the Luftwaffe, but the entire German military, leaving tanks and trucks immobilized and severely limiting operational flexibility. Leadership played a crucial role in implementing these solutions. Commanders like Lieutenant General James Doolittle, who took command of the 8th Air Force in January 1944, understood that aggressive pursuit of the Luftwaffe was necessary to achieve air superiority. Doolittle issued orders explicitly encouraging fighter pilots to pursue German aircraft and to attack targets of opportunity rather than remaining rigidly tied to bomber formations. This represented a significant shift from earlier doctrine that emphasized close escort. The new approach recognized that the best way to protect bombers was to destroy German fighters before they could attack. Doolittle's leadership brought changes beyond just tactical doctrine. He worked to improve pilot morale, advocating for better living conditions, more regular rest periods, and recognition for outstanding performance. He understood that fighter pilots, like all combat personnel, performed better when they felt supported and appreciated. He also pushed for improved coordination between fighter groups and bomber commands, ensuring that escort assignments were clear, that rendezvous procedures were practiced and understood, and that contingency plans existed for various scenarios. Colonel Don Blakesley and other group commanders translated these strategic directives into tactical reality. They trained their pilots in aggressive tactics, encouraged initiative, and led by example. Blakesley personally flew more combat missions than almost any other pilot in the European theater, accumulating combat hours that demonstrated his commitment to the fight. His pilots knew their commander would never ask them to take risks he would not take himself. This leadership created a culture of excellence and aggression that permeated the entire 4th Fighter Group. The culture that developed in elite fighter groups like the 4th Fighter Group emphasized several key values. Aggressiveness in combat was paramount. Pilots were expected to seek out enemy aircraft and engage them whenever circumstances permitted. Mutual support among pilots was essential. No pilot fought alone. Wingmen protected their leaders, and leaders protected their wingmen. Technical excellence was expected. Pilots had to know their aircraft intimately, understanding its capabilities and limitations, and how to extract maximum performance under combat conditions. Finally, there was an expectation of humility despite success. The best pilots recognized that luck played a role in survival and that overconfidence killed. The logistical solution underpinning everything else deserves recognition. Keeping 200 fighters operational required extraordinary efforts by ground crews, supply personnel, and maintenance specialists. Each P-51 needed regular inspections, engine maintenance, repairs of combat damage, and countless small adjustments to keep it flying. Armament crews loaded thousands of rounds of .50 caliber ammunition for each mission. Fuel trucks filled tanks and drop tanks with thousands of gallons of high-octane aviation fuel. The entire logistical infrastructure of the 8th Air Force existed to support these combat operations. The unsung heroes of the air war were the maintenance personnel who kept aircraft flying. These men worked in all weather conditions, often outdoors in the cold and mud of English winters, performing tasks that required both technical skill and physical strength. They changed engines, repaired battle damage, adjusted control systems, serviced hydraulics, maintained electrical systems, and performed countless other tasks necessary to keep complex machines operational. Without their dedication and expertise, the fighters would have remained grounded regardless of pilot skill or tactical brilliance. The story of 200 P-51 Mustangs appearing over Berlin raises important questions about the nature of air power, the ethics of strategic bombing, and the human cost of technological warfare. While the Mustang groups achieved their tactical and operational objectives, establishing air superiority and protecting bomber formations, the broader moral implications of the strategic bombing campaign remain controversial decades after the war ended. German pilots facing these overwhelming formations were not monsters or fanatics in most cases. They were young men defending their homeland, many of them conscripts with limited training, thrust into desperate circumstances. Luftwaffe fighter pilot memoirs and post-war interviews reveal human beings caught in an impossible situation. They knew they were losing. They understood that each mission might be their last. Yet they continued to fly, motivated by loyalty to comrades, duty to country, and the simple human desire to survive in a chaotic situation they did not create and could not control. The humanity of individual German pilots complicates easy narratives about good versus evil. Yes, they served an evil regime that perpetrated the Holocaust and launched aggressive wars that killed tens of millions. Individual pilots bore some responsibility for their service to that regime. Yet many were teenagers when the war started, indoctrinated by years of Nazi propaganda, with limited access to information that would have allowed them to question what they were told. Some actively supported Nazi ideology. Others simply tried to survive and protect their comrades. The moral calculus is not simple. The German perspective on those massive American formations was one of profound shock mixed with grudging admiration. Experienced Luftwaffe pilots, veterans of the Battle of Britain, the Eastern Front, and years of combat over Western Europe, recognized exceptional aircraft and skilled opponents when they saw them. The P-51 Mustang impressed even enemies. Its combination of performance, range, and reliability represented a significant technical achievement. German pilots could respect the aircraft while hating what it represented, overwhelming American industrial power, crushing Germany through sheer material superiority. Post-war interviews with German pilots reveal complex emotions about their wartime service. Many expressed pride in their technical skill and the camaraderie they shared with fellow pilots. They took satisfaction in having fought bravely against overwhelming odds. At the same time, many acknowledged the criminal nature of the regime they served and expressed regret for their role in its wars. Some maintained that they fought for Germany, not for Nazism, a distinction that may seem like rationalization but reflected genuine beliefs. Others rejected this distinction, arguing that anyone who fought for Hitler bore responsibility for Hitler's crimes. The strategic bombing campaign itself, which the Mustang groups made possible, remains ethically complex. The Americans practiced daylight precision bombing, ostensibly targeting specific industrial and military objectives, rather than conducting the area bombing campaigns that British Bomber Command employed against German cities at night. In theory, this approach minimized civilian casualties while maximizing damage to Germany's war-making capacity. In practice, the distinction often blurred. Bombing accuracy was far less precise than pre-war theories suggested. Bombs intended for factories frequently hit nearby residential areas. The cumulative effect of sustained strategic bombing was enormous civilian suffering. The actual accuracy of daylight precision bombing fell far short of pre-war expectations. Bombardiers aimed their weapons from altitudes of 20 to 30,000 feet, through clouds and flak, at targets obscured by smoke and defended by fighters. Wind, temperature, and atmospheric pressure affected bomb trajectories in ways difficult to calculate precisely. Equipment malfunctioned, human error occurred. Studies showed that even under ideal conditions, only a fraction of bombs dropped fell within 1,000 feet of their aim points. Under combat conditions, with fighters attacking and flak exploding around bomber formations, accuracy deteriorated further. The civilian casualties from strategic bombing numbered in the hundreds of thousands. German cities were devastated, with Hamburg, Dresden, and Berlin suffering particularly severe damage. Families were killed in their homes. Historic architecture was destroyed. Cultural treasures were lost. The trauma inflicted on survivors lasted generations. Whether these costs were justified by the military necessity of defeating Nazi Germany remains contested. Some argue the bombing shortened the war and saved more lives than it cost by hastening Germany's defeat. Others contend that much of the destruction served little military purpose and constituted a moral failing. Historians continue to debate whether strategic bombing shortened the war and justified its costs. Some argue that the campaign was essential, destroying German industrial capacity, disrupting transportation networks, and forcing Germany to divert enormous resources to air defense that might otherwise have been used on other fronts. Others contend that strategic bombing achieved less than its advocates claimed, while consuming resources that might have been employed more effectively elsewhere. The ethical questions about deliberately targeting civilian morale through bombing remain unresolved and uncomfortable. Economic analysis suggests that strategic bombing did significantly degrade German war production, though perhaps not as dramatically as bombing advocates claimed during the war. Aircraft production actually increased through 1944 despite sustained bombing, as Germany dispersed factories, moved production underground, and prioritized fighter production. However, the strain on transportation networks, the loss of synthetic fuel production, and the need to divert resources to air defense and reconstruction did impose significant costs. Whether these effects justified the enormous investment in bomber production and the loss of tens of thousands of Allied airmen remains debatable. The appearance of overwhelming American fighter strength also reflected broader issues of industrial warfare and national strategy. Germany in 1944 was fighting a multi-front war against enemies with vastly superior resources. The Soviet Union deployed enormous armies that ground down German forces on the Eastern Front. Britain, despite its smaller size, maintained substantial military forces and benefited from its empire's resources. The United States brought industrial capacity that dwarfed all other nations combined. Germany's strategic position was hopeless long before 200 Mustangs appeared over Berlin, but military professionals understood this, while political leadership refused to acknowledge reality. Hitler's strategic decisions had placed Germany in an unwinnable position. The invasion of the Soviet Union in June 1941, undertaken before Britain was defeated, opened a two-front war that stretched German resources beyond sustainable limits. The declaration of war on the United States following Pearl Harbor added an enemy with vastly superior industrial potential. By 1944, Germany faced enemies who collectively possessed overwhelming advantages in population, industrial capacity, natural resources, and strategic position. No amount of tactical brilliance or technological innovation could compensate for such fundamental strategic disadvantages. The human cost of achieving air superiority deserves contemplation. American fighter pilots were volunteers, mostly young men in their early 20s, who believed in their cause and sought adventure or glory, or simply wanted to serve their country. Many died in training accidents before ever seeing combat. Others were shot down over Germany and spent years in prisoner of war camps. Some were killed by flak or mechanical failures, or simply bad luck. Each Mustang that appeared over Berlin represented not just metal and machinery, but a human being with family, friends, hopes, and dreams. The same was true of German pilots and of bomber crews on both sides, and of countless civilians below. The casualty statistics from the air war over Europe are sobering. The United States Army Air Forces lost approximately 18,000 aircraft in the European theater, with tens of thousands of airmen killed. The 8th Air Force alone suffered over 26,000 dead and more than 20,000 prisoners of war from a total force of around 200,000 personnel. This casualty rate, approximately 25% killed or captured, exceeded the casualty rates of most ground combat units. Being a bomber crewman was statistically one of the most dangerous jobs in the American military. The technological dimension of this story raises questions about how societies harness innovation for destructive purposes. The P-51 Mustang was a magnificent achievement of aeronautical engineering. The Packard Merlin engine represented years of development, refining an already excellent design. The aircraft's designers sweated over drag coefficients, fuel efficiency, and structural strength. Engineers and test pilots collaborated to create something beautiful and deadly. All this talent and effort went toward building a machine whose purpose was to kill people and destroy things. The morality of such work is not simple. Many who contributed to the Mustang's development genuinely believed they were fighting against genuine evil, that Nazi Germany represented a threat to human civilization that justified extreme measures to defeat. History has generally validated this assessment, but the violence employed in service of that cause still troubles thoughtful observers. The engineers and workers who built the Mustang generally saw their work as essential to defending freedom and defeating tyranny. They took pride in their contributions to the war effort. Many had family members in the military and understood that the weapons they built might save lives by shortening the war. The moral clarity of World War II, fighting against regimes that clearly threatened civilized values, provided justification that workers in subsequent conflicts often lacked. Yet the fundamental reality remained. They built weapons designed to kill. Comparing the air war in Europe with other theaters illuminates different approaches to similar problems. In the Pacific, American fighters faced different challenges. Distances were often even greater than those in Europe, but Japan lacked Germany's industrial capacity and sophisticated air defenses. The battles over Europe represented industrial warfare at its most intense, with both sides employing cutting-edge technology and enormous resources. The Pacific War was equally brutal but different in character, with geography and Japan's different strategic situation creating distinct conditions. The Pacific theater required even greater range than European operations. Targets in Japan lay thousands of miles from American bases, requiring the capture of island bases through amphibious operations before strategic bombing could begin in earnest. The B-29 Superfortress, designed specifically for this mission, could reach Japan from bases in the Mariana Islands, but even this long-range bomber operated at the limits of its capabilities. Fighter escort for B-29 missions became possible only after the capture of Iwo Jima provided a base roughly halfway between the Marianas and Japan. The distances involved in Pacific operations exceeded anything encountered in Europe. The effectiveness of concentration of force, demonstrated so dramatically by those 200 Mustangs over Berlin, was not a new military principle. Military theorists from Sun Tzu to Clausewitz emphasized the importance of massing strength at the decisive point. What made the Mustang formations remarkable was how they achieved concentration across three-dimensional space at intercontinental ranges. The coordination required to put 200 fighters over a specific location at a specific time, after flying hundreds of miles from bases in England, was extraordinary. Modern military operations take such coordination for granted, but in 1944 it represented the cutting edge of command and control. The command and control systems of 1944 seem primitive by modern standards, but were sophisticated for their time. Communication depended primarily on high-frequency radio, which was subject to interference, weather effects, and enemy jamming. Navigation relied on dead reckoning, celestial observations, and radio direction finding, all of which required skill and provided only approximate positions. Radar could detect aircraft formations, but could not identify individual aircraft or provide detailed information about their composition and intentions. Coordinating large-scale operations required extensive planning, briefings that communicated the plan to all participants, and flexibility to adapt when things inevitably went wrong. The legacy of these missions extended far beyond World War II. The lessons learned about long-range fighter escort, the importance of air superiority, and the possibilities of strategic air power shaped military thinking for generations. The United States Air Force, created as an independent service after the war, built its doctrine around concepts tested and proven over Germany. The idea that air power could be decisive in modern warfare, controversial in the 1930s, became accepted wisdom. Whether this confidence was always justified remains debatable, but its roots trace directly to missions like those massive P-51 formations over Berlin. The sight of 200 P-51 Mustangs filling the sky over Berlin in early 1944 represented more than a tactical victory or a technological achievement. It symbolized the moment when the outcome of the air war over Europe became inevitable. German fighter pilots looking up at that vast formation understood, even if they could not admit it openly, that they were witnessing their own defeat written across the sky in aluminum and steel. Those Mustangs carried more than just bombs and bullets. They carried the weight of American industrial might, the determination of young men who had crossed an ocean to fight tyranny, and the hopes of millions who believed that fascism could and must be defeated. Each aircraft represented countless hours of labor by workers in American factories, the expertise of engineers and designers who pushed the boundaries of aeronautical science, and the courage of pilots who strapped themselves into machines that might become their coffins. The pilots of the 4th Fighter Group and their counterparts in other Mustang-equipped units were not superhuman. They were ordinary young men thrust into extraordinary circumstances. They experienced fear, doubt, exhaustion, and loss. They watched friends die in horrific ways. They grappled with the knowledge that their actions contributed to death and destruction on an enormous scale. Yet they persevered, motivated by duty, camaraderie, and the conviction that their cause was just. Their achievement in establishing air superiority over Germany was hard-won and paid for in blood. The bonds between pilots who flew together were profound. They trusted each other with their lives every time they took off. They celebrated victories together and mourned losses together. They shared cramped quarters, bad food, and the grinding stress of knowing that any mission might be their last. These shared experiences created friendships that lasted lifetimes for those who survived. The veterans of the air war over Europe formed associations after the war, gathering regularly to remember fallen comrades and preserve the history of their service. The German pilots who opposed them deserve recognition as well, not for their cause, which was indefensible, but for their courage under impossible circumstances. Flying obsolescent aircraft with insufficient training, outnumbered and outgunned, they continued to resist long after any realistic hope of victory had vanished. Their individual bravery cannot redeem the regime they served, but it reminds us that even in the context of a just war against genuine evil, the human beings on both sides shared common humanity. Post-war reconciliation between former enemies took time, but eventually occurred. American and German fighter pilots who had tried to kill each other during the war later met at air shows and veterans gatherings, sharing stories and mutual respect for the professional skills they had demonstrated in combat. These encounters were sometimes difficult, laden with complex emotions and painful memories, but they represented a kind of healing. The men who fought the air war understood each other in ways that civilians never could, and this shared understanding transcended national boundaries. The strategic bombing campaign that those Mustang formations protected achieved its objective. Germany's war industries were devastated. Transportation networks collapsed. Oil production plummeted. The Luftwaffe ceased to exist as an effective fighting force. Air superiority enabled the successful Allied invasion of France and the subsequent liberation of Western Europe. Yet the campaign also killed hundreds of thousands of civilians, destroyed irreplaceable cultural heritage, and left trauma that echoed through generations. Acknowledging the effectiveness of strategic bombing does not require celebrating the suffering it caused. The destruction of German cities created humanitarian crises that persisted long after the war ended. Millions were left homeless. Essential services like water, electricity, and sewage treatment were disrupted. Food distribution systems broke down. Disease spread through crowded refugee camps and damaged cities. The winter of 1945-1946 was particularly harsh, with fuel shortages and inadequate shelter causing additional suffering. The reconstruction of Germany required years of effort and enormous resources, much of it provided through the Marshall Plan by the same nation whose bombers had caused much of the destruction. The P-51 Mustang itself endured as one of the iconic aircraft of World War II, and justifiably so. Its combination of performance, range, and reliability proved exactly what was needed at a critical moment. Thousands were produced, and many survived the war to serve in air forces around the world for years afterward. Some still fly today, cherished by collectors and aviation enthusiasts who appreciate the aircraft's grace and historical significance. The Mustang represents what engineering can achieve when talented people focus their abilities on solving difficult problems. The sound of a Merlin-engined Mustang is unmistakable to those familiar with it. The distinctive rumble of the V12 engine, the whistle of air through the radiator intake, and the purposeful snarl at full throttle combine to create a sound that aviation enthusiasts recognize immediately. Restored Mustangs appear at air shows around the world, demonstrating the performance that made them legendary. Watching one perform aerobatics, or hearing one fly overhead, provides a tangible connection to history, a reminder of the young men who flew these machines in combat 8 decades ago. The lessons of that day over Berlin transcend the specific circumstances of World War II. Concentration of force, exploitation of technological advantages, aggressive leadership, and meticulous planning remain fundamental principles of military success. The importance of logistics and industrial capacity in modern warfare, demonstrated so clearly by America's ability to project power across an ocean and sustain intensive operations for years, continues to shape strategic thinking. Nations that ignore these lessons do so at their peril. Modern military operations build on foundations laid during World War II. The concepts of air superiority, strategic bombing, long-range power projection, and combined arms operations were all tested and refined during the war. Contemporary air forces study the campaigns over Europe and the Pacific for lessons applicable to current operations. The technology has changed dramatically, with jet aircraft, precision-guided munitions, stealth, and network-centric warfare transforming the character of air combat. But the fundamental principles remain relevant. Yet perhaps the most important lesson is simpler and more human. Those 200 Mustangs over Berlin represented the determination of free people to resist tyranny, regardless of cost. The pilots who flew those aircraft, the ground crews who maintained them, the factory workers who built them, and the millions of Americans who supported the war effort all contributed to defeating one of history's most evil regimes. Their victory was not inevitable. It required sacrifice, courage, determination, and an unwavering commitment to principles worth fighting for. The cost of that victory must be remembered alongside its necessity. Millions died in World War II. Cities were destroyed. Families were shattered. The Holocaust murdered 6 million Jews and millions of others deemed undesirable by Nazi ideology. The war in the Pacific killed tens of millions of Chinese, Japanese, and others. The Eastern Front consumed entire armies and devastated huge regions. The strategic bombing campaign killed hundreds of thousands of civilians. All of this suffering occurred because one nation embraced fascist ideology, scapegoated minorities, and launched wars of aggression. The lesson is clear. Preventing such ideologies from gaining power is far preferable to defeating them after they have plunged the world into war. When the last of those Mustangs turned for home that day, their wings catching the light as they climbed away from Berlin, they left behind German pilots shaken by what they had witnessed, and German citizens increasingly aware that the war was lost. The psychological impact of that demonstration reverberated through the German military and civilian population. Hope began to fade. The end was coming. The journey home after combat missions was often quiet. Pilots who had been chattering on the radio during the fight fell silent, each alone with his thoughts. They counted aircraft in the formation, noting which positions were empty, wondering if missing friends had managed to bail out or if they were gone forever. They monitored fuel gauges, hoping they had enough to reach home. They nursed damaged aircraft, coaxing maximum performance from engines that ran rough or hydraulic systems that barely functioned. And they thought about the next mission, knowing it would come soon. The men who flew those missions did not think of themselves as heroes. They were doing their jobs, completing their missions, trying to survive long enough to go home. But heroism is often found in such ordinary determination to do difficult things for important reasons. Those pilots faced death every time they climbed into their cockpits. They persevered anyway. They fought for each other, for their country, and for principles they believed transcended national interest. Their legacy is the world they helped create, a world where fascism was defeated, where free nations proved they could unite against tyranny, where ordinary people demonstrated extraordinary courage. The image of 200 P-51 Mustangs over Berlin captures a moment when everything changed. The hunted became hunters. The defenders became attackers. The impossible became inevitable. That moment, replicated in countless missions over months of sustained operations, broke the Luftwaffe's back and opened the sky above Germany to Allied bombers. The strategic implications were enormous, but the human meaning was simpler. Young men far from home, flying magnificent machines, fighting for something larger than themselves, and prevailing against determined opposition. Their story deserves remembering, not because war should be glorified, but because their sacrifice should be honored. They fought genuine evil and won. They demonstrated that courage, determination, and superior technology can overcome even formidable enemies. They proved that free nations, when united and committed, possess strengths that authoritarian regimes cannot match. And they showed that individual human beings, ordinary people, thrust into extraordinary circumstances, can rise to meet challenges that seem overwhelming. The Mustangs that appeared over Berlin that day have long since been relegated to museums and private collections. The pilots who flew them are nearly all gone, claimed by time after surviving the dangers of combat. But their achievement endures. They won the air war over Europe. They made possible the liberation of a continent. They helped defeat fascism and preserve freedom. That legacy, written across the sky in contrails and cannon fire, remains as relevant today as it was 8 decades ago. The price of freedom is eternal vigilance and the willingness to fight when fighting becomes necessary. Those 200 Mustangs over Berlin and the men who flew them exemplified both. Their courage, their sacrifice, and their victory stand as testament to what free people can achieve when they unite against tyranny and commit themselves fully to a just cause. The world they fought to create, imperfect as it is, stands as their monument.